welcome to Have Guitar Will Travel, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. With your host, me, James Patrick Regan, otherwise known as Jimmy from the Deadlies. And today I'm speaking with author, guitar tech, Marshall amplifier collector, and guitarist Brian Ranks. In our conversation, Brian tells us about his new project, a book documenting his and his business partner's Peter Margolis' collection of vintage Marshall amplifiers, titled Collecting Loud History. Brian tells us about when he started his business restoring vintage Marshalls in the early 80s and how he became an authorized repair person from Jim Marshall. Brian talks about growing up in Western New York working for bands and what brought him to LA. Brian talks about doing tech work on the road with Carmine Appice's King Cobra, Marx and REO Speedwagon, and his experiences with Gary Richrath and Dave Amato, and how he got Dave hooked on vintage gear. He also tells us about working for David Lee Roth. Brian describes his collection of guitars and amps and his rental business, renting Marshalls for studio work and Marshall prop gear for music videos and TV shows. Brian tells us about who he uses to serve the electronic parts of the Marshalls: Bob Bradshaw, Roy Blankenship, and Doug Anderson. Brian describes the Marshall amp he's still looking for, and he also describes the Marshall serial code number system and how that relates to the age of the amp. Brian tells us about the copious notes he took along the way that help him identify the true age and whether or not the amp has been messed with. Brian discusses the tribulations with recoding old Celestion speakers, and Brian tells us about how he ended up with a bunch of celebrity-owned Marshalls. And Brian talks about his favorite case companies and where people go wrong when buying cases. Brian tells us about his other passion, drag racing, and why he misses spending time on a tour bus. To find out more about the book and how to get the book, you can go to the book's website, collectingloudhistory.com. That's collectingloudhistory.com. Please subscribe, like, comment, share, and most of all, review this podcast. I'd really appreciate it. And please support Vintage Guitar Magazine and all the wonderful things they do for us guitar players, because guess what? They do so many wonderful things for us guitar players. Here's my buddy Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hi, James. How you doing?
Good. It's an honor to speak with you, sir.
The pleasure's mine. Trust me.
No. Pleasure's all mine. Peter told me that you were restoring Marshalls at around 1994. How early did you start restoring Marshalls?
I actually started in the very early 80s, and I was doing stuff kind of on my own. And then later on in the 80s or whatever, I met with Jim Marshall and got established as an authorized service center just for doing non-electronics work, just doing the cosmetics of the boxes for everything that they make and so forth, and refurbishment of all the hardware and so forth. So I got going on that in the mid-'80s, so I was probably doing it for close to 12 years maybe before Peter met me.
Okay, all right. And
over the years, I've just continued to keep doing it. In between, I've kind of retired now from touring as a guitar technician, but all the time when I was home from tours and stuff like that, I just immersed myself into doing restorations for folks and stuff. So it kept me busy, and over the course of 40 years, I can't even begin to guess how many actual Marshalls products I've actually worked on. I can guess that in doing complete restorations from the wood on up, I've done about 25-ish a year for 40 years.
Wow.
So I don't count just the grill cloths, or somebody comes in and, hey, my plastic hardware is all brittle and cracked, can you replace it?
Yeah.
Those are just insignificant little repair jobs, basically.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Western New York, south of Buffalo, out in dairy farm country.
And
yep.
How'd you end up in the music industry?
Well, I was doing stuff around there as a teenager, with friends and stuff that had bands and so forth. And I originally just kind of started out, I played a little bit of guitar, but I was helping them out with gear and stuff, going in and out of shows, and dabbled a tiny little bit in the early days with audio stuff, but that really wasn't my bag. And then by the time I had moved out to Los Angeles in '82, kind of right in that area from then on, I had from one guy telling the next guy and word of mouth or whatever, I ended up, out on big tours, and it turned into a 40-year traveling career.
Yeah, right on. What brought you to L.A.? How'd you even know to come to L.A.?
Well, a couple of the friends that I had gone to high school with that were in bands and stuff, they came out in '81.
Okay.
And so they were a year ahead of me. They came out, kind of tested the waters, and they were having a great time. And at that time, I was, working in my day job at that time. Was I worked in a hardwood sawmill.
Okay.
Working in the lumber business, and they convinced me. Said, "Hey, just come on out to California. There's so much more in the music business that you can do out here and stuff." And so I saved up my nickels, and in '82 I moved to California, and it was an advantage because they had already had a couple, 3 guys in a house and so forth that they were renting. So I had a place to stay, a place to park my vehicle, and I was very fortunate because I moved to Hollywood, and that's where they were at, and I was very fortunate. I was in Hollywood for 4 days and got a job in a big lumber yard in Hollywood.
Okay, all right.
And so I was working music stuff at night.
Okay, all right. Who did you start working for?
Oh golly! In the early days, bands like NZ Hustler, which was a new band out of New Zealand,
okay,
or whatever. I worked for Carmine Appice's band King Cobra.
Oh yeah, of course.
Back in the day, just a whole bunch of, and I think one thing led to another, and it just mushroomed out. And then by let's see, roughly 86, 87, I was working with Richard Marx with his first solo tour stuff.
Okay. Was that with Tim Pierce on guitar?
No. That was that would be Paul Warren in those days.
Okay. All right.
Who later went on to do Joe Cocker and Tina Turner and stuff.
Yeah.
I worked for Paul's band doing the club circuit around L.A. He had a band called Explorer.
Okay.
And he played a Carina Explorer. And he had a Fawn Marshall combo.
Oh, did he really? Oh, right on.
Yeah, that was his thing. He had a Carina Explorer and a Fawn Marshall combo. But Richard Marx opened up a tour for REO Speedwagon in '87. And as an opening act, I found myself with basically nothing to really do per se until 4:00 in the afternoon. So I got into helping the REO guys set up all their stuff, and lo and behold, the next year, later in the year, early in the year, I went to work on the first Monsters of Rock tour in '88.
Wow!
With Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
Scorpions and Van Halen were on that tour.
Yeah.
But later in the year of '88, REO called me, and I went to work for them.
Right. I know.
And so I was there during Gary Richrath's last year in the band.
Oh, wow.
And then in '89, I was already on the crew when Dave Amato auditioned.
Okay.
And then I consequently worked for him for, like 11 years or 12 years doing REO stuff. I still do substitution work for him. Dave is a very, very dear friend of mine. We talk all the time.
Right on.
And he was nice enough to let us use a bunch of his stuff for this book.
Oh, that's cool. Cool.
So I'm the caretaker of his collection. I don't know if Peter had explained to you or whatever, but Peter has a very large collection. Sure. It didn't start out that way when I first met him, but his collection, he has the most of us guys, and Dave Amato has approximately 170-ish.
Oh, wow.
Pieces of Marshall gear, and I have 130 some. So between the three of us guys, we got like 500 and change pieces of Marshall product, and I'm the caretaker of all 3 collections.
Right on. That's fantastic.
So it keeps me busy.
Yes, I'm sure it does. When working with, was Gary still with it enough to when in REO? Was he with it enough to was he still buying Les Pauls and buying Marshalls back then?
He wasn't at that time. Towards the end of when he was in REO, it was like he was having some problems with drug and alcohol abuse, and the rest of the band had all cleaned up and so forth.
Yeah.
And they decided to part ways at that time, and Gary kind of went his own way. But at that time, at the end of the 80s, I remember when Gary had 13 50s Les Pauls with humbuckers.
Wow.
You know, and his favorite touring guitars were a pair of 60s.
Oh, that's cool. Wow.
And they had been used so much and toured with so hard. The main one had been to Gibson 2 different times. It was on its 3rd fretboard.
Wow.
Because, you know, you can only dress the frets so many times before the rosewood starts getting thinner and thinner, and there's nothing left to hold the frets into the fingerboard anymore. So when they'd get bad, they'd go back to Gibson. Gibson would put a new fingerboard on it.
Wow.
You know, put frets on it and send it back to him. But one of his 60s had was on its 3rd fingerboard, and the other one was on its 2nd one.
Wow.
And all the rest of them were on their originals.
Okay. All right.
But he had like a new. I remember him having like a brand new with tags, 57 or 58 gold top.
Wow.
It was really, really sweet. He had a couple of 57 triple pickups.
Okay.
Stuff like that. He had a little variety going.
Yeah. What's Dave Amato's collection like, guitar wise?
Well, when he joined REO, he had some Jacksons and he had one Les Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a couple of Fenders too. He didn't have any vintage guitars.
Uh-huh.
His newest guitar at that time was from the 80s, and or oldest guitar, I should say, was from the 80s. And then it kind of all started. We were, for whatever reason, REO, we were in New York City for something on a day off. And Dave and I took the train into Manhattan or whatever, and we went to 48th Street.
Yep.
And at that time, We Buy Guitars was one of the big dogs on 48th Street for selling old guitars.
Yep.
And, you know, we went in there, we were looking at guitars for a period of time, and I fell in love with a 74 gold top with soap bars and was considering buying it. And then the owner dragged out, he goes, well, I got this guitar you might be interested in, Dave. He drags this guitar out of the safe, and it was a 52 bullion gold.
Wow.
Les Paul.
Yeah.
That had always been in a collection. There was no greening. They looked practically brand new.
Oh my God.
And at that time it was like $2,500. And Dave was like going, "Oh my God, I don't know. My wife will kill me." So we were so worried about it. We went and had lunch and talked it over for an hour. And then came back to the store, and he ended up buying the Les Paul, and I bought the other gold top. And of course, when he got home, his wife was ready to kill him. You know, what are you buying? You've already got guitars. Why do you need to have them? But that was the start of him buying vintage guitars, and then it just kind of mushroomed out from there as REO. You know, he started making more and more money with REO. He started, reinvesting it into older guitars and amplifiers and stuff. Yeah. And so if you ask Dave about his vintage guitars or vintage amps, he'll always blame me for causing the problem that he has with storage.
What's your collection like as far as vintage guitars?
I don't have an. Had to get rid of here and there a few of the older ones. Uh-huh. I'm down to about 16 or something like that, 16, 17 now. Okay. I've had as many as 24 or 25 at a time. I've probably owned 150 in my life.
Okay.
You know how it is. You try something out for a while, and then a few years later, you bail on it, and you get something else, and you try that for a while, and so forth. So I've had kind of a little bit of everything over the years.
Okay.
But I've always I've gravitated towards I loved Explorers.
Yeah.
And so forth, and I had some reissue Carina Explorers, which I don't anymore. Okay. And but I still got my 76.
Okay.
I've got about 10 Les Pauls.
Okay.
Of various types and so forth. So no more. I got rid of all the 50s Les Pauls, unfortunately, that I had. But I've got a lot of historic collection type stuff.
Sure.
And things like that come out of the custom shop. But mainly I've kind of spent most of my time, trading around and, getting my Marshall collection to where I want it to be.
Yeah, yeah. You rent Marshalls and stuff? Do you rent it for productions?
I did when I was living in L.A. In the first few years that I was once I started getting a few Marshalls together, I would say probably maybe 3 years, 4 years before Peter met me, I had a business. The name of my business is Axe Victim Audio.
Okay.
And primarily what I did is I just rented Marshalls for studio stuff.
Okay.
And at the time, I know in '89, Dave and I bought like a lot of Marshall prop gear.
Okay.
So I had a couple of dozen Marshall 412 prop cabinets. I had another couple of dozen prop heads and so forth. And in the 90s, when, videos with giant back lines were the norm, I had one of the largest groupings of mint condition, brand new Marshall stuff to rent out for those kind of things.
Okay.
So I did a pile of famous videos and stuff like that in the 90s.
Oh, right on.
And that helped, buy more Marshalls.
Yeah.
And I did studio rentals and so forth.
Yeah.
A few producers knew that I had a lot of Marshalls, and several of my friends knew, and when they'd go in to do recordings and stuff, my shtick, once I got a good variety, especially of cabinets, I had enough that, somebody called, I need a good Marshall 412 cabinet. Well, do you want a straight cabinet?
Yeah.
Do you want a slant cabinet? Do you want 25 watters? Do you want 30 watters? Do you want bass cones? Do you want lead cones? And when you start offering that many things, you start, they don't understand that there's all that many differences.
Yeah.
And it's like, tell you what I'll do. I'll send over a variety of 3 or 4 different ones, and then I'll come back in tomorrow or the next day and pick up the ones that you decided you didn't want.
Yeah. Wow.
And pick out your favorite, and that's what I did for customers for years and years. And then towards the end of the 90s, the LA scene started to get away from using recording studios. Everybody had home studios.
Yeah, yeah.
And around the same time in the late 90s, a lot of the producers and stuff that were doing lots of rock albums and stuff, they started figuring out that, oh, geez, on every album I do, I call some rental company and I rent I rent a couple of Vox AC30s. I rent some Marshalls. I rent some vintage guitars. And, these producers started realizing, well, if I buy that kind of stuff myself and own my own little herd of vintage gear, when I produce an album, now I can bill the record company separately for the rental gear instead of somebody else getting it. And so the rental company started, renting less and less and less stuff over time.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and then in 2001, I moved to Northern California and kind of got away from the studio rental stuff and so forth. And
is that where you are now?
Yeah, I'm between Sacramento and South Lake Tahoe in the foothills.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I live in Napa.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I'm near Placerville.
Okay, right on.
So
my cousin lives in Diamond Springs.
No way.
Yeah.
Well, technically, I'm in Cameron Park, which is Diamond Springs is between here and Placerville. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he's just up the hill a couple miles.
Exactly.
That's fine.
Cameron Park's a beautiful place all by itself.
Yeah,
with the airport and
it's semi-rural here. It's I kind of got I live in an older suburban neighborhood where people have big lots and stuff like that.
Right on.
And one of the attractions of moving here was not only was I able to afford an actual real home as opposed to down in Los Angeles, but the property I picked had a big building on it that was built to put an RV in.
Oh, okay.
And so that big building became my shop and storage area for all my stuff.
Right on. So now I know when I want my Marshalls restored where I'm going.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're semi-local.
Exactly. Well, to me, you're local to me.
Yeah. Yep.
Right on. So for a time, you worked for David Lee Roth?
I did. Well, I first worked for David Lee Roth before I did the Richard Marx tour in '86, '87. I did the Eat 'em and Smile tour.
Wow.
The majority of it. But I was at that time, because I was a young fart, and they had some serious cats out there, from a couple of them from the old Van Halen crew, that were doing Dave's tour at the time. I worked at the production office on the Sunset Strip, that was just down the street from the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Roxy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And my gig with them is they provided me with a company truck. I would go into the office and hang out, and the ladies that ran the office would send me over Laurel Canyon to go get the mail, and I would go out to Dave's, out to Rothwood and Pasadena, and pick up stuff for Dave to send out on tour or whatever. Or run errands for Dave while he was on the road. They'd call in, "Oh, I need you to go to one of the custom shirt and clothier places or whatever."
Yeah.
To get he'd order custom stuff to wear on stage, and I'd have to go pick it up and get it out to him.
Yeah.
They wanted somebody at the office that understood enough about gear. Steve Vilewood, he had a bunch of Jose modified heads.
Okay.
Mark heads and so forth. And periodically they needed to be retubed, or something went goofy with one of them on the road. And so they'd put it in a flight case and send it to the office.
Okay.
And I'd toss it in the truck, and I'd go out to Jose's shop and drop it off.
Oh, right on. Right on.
So, yep. so I got to meet Jose in those days.
Yeah, yeah. What was it like being around Jose?
Kind of interesting. He was a very quiet guy. He seemed to know an awful lot about amplifiers, and he had his own ideas about what he needed to do to them to please these guys for tone and stuff.
Yeah. And when you're restoring an amp, are you just bringing it back to what it was stock?
But basically, like I said, I don't do the electronic stuff, because there's so many people in all these big cities that do electronics work. And down in LA, I used to have Bob Bradshaw serviced a bunch of stuff for me, but Roy Blankenship is one of my favorite guys for working on old Marshalls and stuff, because when you go into his shop, there's going to be 10 or 12 other vintage Marshalls sitting on the bench, lined up from other customers, most of the famous players and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, he knows what to do to them. He's got a good parts inventory. Another guy that's really good down in the LA area is Doug Anderson.
Okay.
He's another cat that, he's been very clever over the years, and, through various online auctions and things like that, he's purchased, 50 and 60-year-old parts when some place would get rid of a whole bunch of new old stock of parts.
Sure. So
it's kind of nice sometimes. It's costly, but it's nice to know a guy that you can go get an old filter cap that's never used.
Yeah.
Might have to pay for the butt for it, but it's some of these guys that got resistors and mustard caps. They got old ones that they've been hoarding around for a long time, and know them or whatever. They're more than happy to, restore your amp with the right stuff.
Yep.
I take like if somebody sends me a head or whatever, I can replace switches and jacks and that sort of stuff. But I take the chassis. A lot of times I just tell the guys, pull the chassis out, leave your chassis at home, send me the box.
I got it. Yeah. And in Northern California, is there anybody that you use up here for electronics, or not so much?
Not really. I still take everything down to LA.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Again, there's so many guys that do it, but unfortunately, we're so far away from the manufacture of a lot of those kind of parts.
Yeah.
A lot of guys that do electronics repair, they just go down to the local electronics shop and get whatever brand of resistor or capacitor or whatever that they happen to have in stock, and if the value is in the ballpark, that's what they use to fix your amp.
Yeah.
And I tend to like to try to get as close to original as possible.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's where the value is getting it as close to original as possible. Are there Marshall amps that you're still looking for, that you're still scouting?
Yep.
What are those? Do you want to say?
One in particular that's pretty elusive. If you look at the sales literature from like 67, 8, 9, they didn't call them rigs or half stacks or whatever from Marshall. They called them setups. In all the early catalogs, they refer to a head in a cabinet as a setup.
Okay.
But they offered bass, lead, and organ.
Oh wow!
Marshall made organ heads.
Oh, wow.
They are super rare.
Yeah.
They were only available as a 50 watt. Supposedly they made them up to like 74 or 75. However, I've never really seen or heard of any that were made that late. I didn't see them listed in any catalogs around that time. Just like a bass amp is voiced slightly different than a lead amp. It's just a few resistors and capacitors that change the value from one to the other. Same with the organ amp. They just changed the value of a couple of things, so it was voiced differently. It lent itself to, in the 60s, people were playing Hammond B3s and Wurlitzers and stuff.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
And, they were encouraging people to buy a head and a cabinet to plug your organ.
Yeah.
And I've somewhere on the internet right now, there's a guy that's selling just the empty box for an organ head.
Really?
Yeah, but there's no amp to go with it.
Oh, no.
And I think what has happened over time, because they didn't make an awful lot of them, I think most of them probably got converted into lead guitar amps as opposed to staying as an organ amp.
Okay, all right.
Just like a lot of people take a bass amp and turn it into a lead amp. It's like, $15 or $20 worth of parts and your guy's time of labor, and you can go back and forth. And I think that's kind of what happened with the organ amps over time. Is I don't want an organ amp, but my guy can turn it into a guitar amp. Great.
Sure. But it would still have the organ on the printing in the back, correct?
No.
No,
the 50 watters didn't have that.
Okay.
What it would be is a little white tag in the upper left corner on the back side. That showed the model number.
Okay.
A bass would be a Model 8 1986. A lead 50 watt would be a Model 1987. The organ amp was a Model 1989.
Okay. All right.
And of course, those tags got brittle over time, and most of your amps today, those tags are missing because they got brittle and bumped and they cracked and broke off.
Yeah.
So yeah, if a guy bought one of those amps, he may not even know that it was originally an organ amp, and it might not have sounded quite right. So depending, some service guy might have looked at the inside of it and go, "Oh, these things are wrong in here. Let me fix them for you."
Yeah, exactly. The last letter of the serial number, that represents the year. Is that correct?
That started in 69.
69. And
all the ones before that are subject to a good amount of knowledge, because you can have serial numbers from one year that are very similar to serial numbers of the next year for the amps.
Okay, all right.
In the stuff like that, yeah, you kind of got to. That's kind of one indicator of 1 or 2 years that it might be in, and you need to look at other things. Sometimes you can catch a date off of a filter cap or something like that. When you start really looking things over closely, you can determine that the parts in this were made in 68, not 69.
I got it. And when the letter started, how do they correspond? So is A 69 or is A 70?
A turns out it's actually 69 because the metal panel or the aluminum panel 69 heads were like the last half of the year in 69. The first half of the year would have been plexi paneled amps.
Okay.
So the 69s and 1970s both carry the letter number A.
Okay.
And there is no B.
Okay.
Because of that. So they started in 71 with the letter C, and then proceeded afterwards. They skipped letters like I and O and stuff like that.
So K would be what year?
K would be in 1978 in a head.
Okay. And L would be 79?
9.
Okay. All right. I wasn't sure if I didn't know if L got skipped or how that worked.
Nope, L's there, but there's no I and there's no O.
Okay. All right. Very good. And so, apart from the organ, are there other? Do you do work on other amps as well besides Marshalls?
No. That's one of the benefits that I've had over the years. I made the determination pretty much from the get-go. I was interested in Marshalls, and I decided, you know what? I'm not going to work on Fenders. I'm not going to work on Ampegs or Vox. Or, I didn't want to be the jack of all trades and the master of none of them.
Yeah.
I wanted to just pursue the Marshall thing. And in the early years, I, especially with cabinets and stuff, because heads were pretty easy to identify for when they were made. But there was never any identification on the cabinets in the old days.
Yeah.
As to what year they were really made, or even what speakers were inside of them for a lot of the early ones. So I started making copious notes when I started restoring these things. I had a big, giant, 3-ring binder, and I would just write down, everything about the cabinet in front of me, what kind of vinyl it had, what kind of piping it had, if it had corners or not, what kind of stuff held the corners on, whether it had metal handles or plastic handles, if it had a serial number, write that down.
Yeah.
And then after a number of years go by and you start compiling all this data, then it becomes easier and easier to kind of develop a flow and realize when along the line, on the production line, they made changes, just like an automobile.
Sure.
The difference is on an automobile, you have a VIN number or a serial number on it that tells you when it was made.
Yeah.
They have to by law. On amplifier cabinets, there was nothing in the old days.
Yeah.
And there was, there's the whole thing that used to always amuse me in the early days when I started out doing this. People would tell me, no two Marshall cabinets sound the same. They're all different. And I used to scratch my head about that. Well, once I really started getting into the weeds with it, I realized why.
Yeah.
And it was because, you have straights versus plants.
Yeah.
You have some of the cabinets have 30-watt speakers in them. Some of them have 25s.
Yeah.
And then there's the bass cone versus lead cone, and you have no idea. Even when you were buying a brand new cabinet in the store, if you buy two cabinets, one of them could have 25 watters, the other could have 30s, and one could have bass cones and the other lead cones, and you had no way of knowing.
Yeah.
And honestly, nobody cared in the old days.
Yep, exactly. They
weren't worth enough money to care about.
Yeah. How close was the relationship with Celestion throughout the vintage Marshall era?
I got through a couple people that I worked with and toured with that had Celestion endorsements and stuff. I got to meet several of the people that worked at Celestion, and there's here and there was parts and stuff that I could get, but for the most part, all the old stuff was, they quit making all that stuff.
Yeah.
But when they started reissuing 25 watters and so forth again, and started getting into the heritage stuff, well, if you knew who to talk to, you could get correct Celestion recone kits.
Yeah.
Like a drop-in kit. With all their parts, all you got to do is clean up the old blown-up frame and drop in the new kit, solder it in, put the glue around the edges and the gasket, and Bob's your uncle. and most people didn't know how to do that. They didn't have a way to get that stuff from Celestion. They would have to go to one of the big speaker reconing warehouse things around the country where they might have a little bit of Celestion stuff, or they got a lot of close but no cigar kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
it depends. You know, I remember in the 80s when we would recone speakers. You probably heard of a company called Waldom.
Sure.
Waldom Frame was the name of the company. Waldom Frame had they would make recone kits for Celestions.
Okay.
And the difference was, even back in the old days, it was like $60 to recone a Celestion with Celestion parts, and it was like, $30 to do it with a Waldom kit. So lots of people saved the money.
Yep.
And what I found over time is, turns out that the Waldom recone kits, they were cheap, but they were horrible because they had much thicker paper for the cone.
Okay.
So forth. And what you would find is they were super stiff. And I used to have, when guys would come over to my shop in North Hollywood in the old days, I would demonstrate. I had a couple of those Waldoms around the shop, and I would demonstrate how hard and horrible the paper cone was by bouncing a quarter off the cone.
Oh, wow.
and it would just throw it right back at you like pitching into a pitching net.
Yeah.
And what we found with people, I would get guys that would come in and go, I bought this Marshall cabinet, and I usually run my head on 4, but this cabinet I have to run on 7 to get the same volume out of it.
Yeah.
I open the thing up, and here's your answer. It's got Waldom recones in it that would take twice as much voltage to move the cone the same distance.
Wow.
So they were absolutely horrible, and every once in a while you still run into them today. And find one or two in an old cabinet you buy used, and they just pull them out, and they got to get sent off and done right.
Yeah. Getting back to the book, so the notes that you took about the different stuff they used in different periods of time, that's in the book, correct?
The notes are not in the book, but the summary of all of that is what basically created the book.
Okay. All right.
Over time, as I was doing this, by the time I was into the 90s a ways, I started realizing, hey, there are no publications anywhere on how to date a Marshall cabinet.
Oh, yeah.
Or as to what the differences are from one to the next. What makes a 74 Marshall cabinet different than a 76? How do you tell?
Yeah.
And basically even shops that would take them in, they were just kind of going off the word of the guy selling it to them.
Okay.
And another thing that I had found from touring and so forth, which is kind of common even in automobiles, so to speak, you can go out today and buy a brand new 2024 automobile.
Sure.
But that automobile is dated and on all the stuff, like I said, the VIN numbers and stuff. There's, you can't hide what year it was made.
Yeah.
But on the speaker cabinets, nobody knew. And I would find in traveling, you would go into a music store, and here's a cabinet. They may have bought a half dozen of them from Marshall, but it took them 3 years to sell all 6.
Yeah.
And so the last guy that bought one, if he bought it this year, he's thinking he's buying brand new this year's cabinet. He doesn't realize that the cabinet was actually made 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you get a lot of people that they misidentify what they own because they really truly don't know.
Yep.
And I always wanted to do a parts identification thing, and I was determined that eventually I was going to do a parts identification book of some sort. And talking to Peter, thank goodness he helped me see the light. And if I had just done a parts identification book of some sort and listed off all the differences and what goes on year to year, it would have been a small book. And it would have been like a parts catalog from, Chevrolet or Ford Motor Company.
Yeah.
There wouldn't have been a lot of pictures. It just would have been a lot of information to digest.
Yeah.
And it probably would have sold 100 copies. So he convinced me to do a thing where we take pictures of all the gear and take detailed pictures instead of just a one picture from the front like a lot of previous publications.
Yeah.
And so you can get an idea of what changes here and there, physically by looking at it.
Yeah.
But then I was able to, on all these chapters, go year by year, list out what things were different cosmetically than the previous year.
Yep.
And then I put this giant, about, I don't know, it's 48 or 50 pages of color pictures. There's about 160 different parts and all that.
Wow.
It goes every screw.
Yeah, that's
every
fantastic.
Screw, and it'll list what the sizes of screws were used for in various heads, cabinets, or combos or whatever. The different pipings show the different sizes of wood and the number of plies in the multi-core birch ply. I did a thing with each different style of caster through the years.
Yeah.
Up until the end of the 80s or whatever, or the beginning of the 80s where we cut off the book. And just everything you can imagine, the different styles of corners, the multiple styles of handles.
Yeah.
Most people have no clue that there are two different types of metal handles in the 60s on cabinets.
Yeah.
I picked both styles. And the chrome bar in the middle of the old handles was held on differently in the first year, maybe 2 years, than they were on after that.
Okay. All right.
They started out, in the pictures in the book will show it. Marshall used to tap each end of the chrome bar, and there'd be a threaded bolt that would go in on each side to hold it in. Well, somewhere along the line, they decided, hey, instead of, tapping this out and putting threads on each end, we can omit that process. Let's just put a long bolt through the middle and a nut on the other end.
Okay.
Don't have to tap and drill out anything for threading.
Yeah.
It saves the process, made it cheaper.
Yep.
Every now and then, Marshall did something like that where they cleverly changed it slightly, which made it cheaper for them to mass produce.
Sure.
Or for their vendor they were buying stuff from at the time to mass produce. Marshall actually didn't make the handles and stuff in those days, and they subcontracted that out to a couple of different vendors.
Yeah. Do you have any celebrity-owned Marshalls?
A pile of them. Because of working in touring in the professional industry, I mean, I'm surrounded all the time and have been for most of my life by, famous rock stars and stuff like that. And I was always in the position where, especially in the 80s and 90s, one of these guys would get an endorsement for a different type of gear. Oh, I just got a whole bunch of free gear. Well, I'll sell some of my old Marshalls. And I was in the catbird seat, and I'd go, thank you very much. Let's just see what you have. I might be interested in taking all of those. And, there were bands like, I bought when David Lee Roth after the 91 tour, I bought a whole bunch of Marshalls from David Lee Roth.
Okay.
I bought a whole back line of Marshalls from the Cult at one time.
Wow.
Back in the 80s, I bought a heap load of white Marshalls that were owned by Dokken.
Okay. Right on.
Back in the old days when they decided to get rid of they had a lot of prop gear and so forth and a few loaded pieces.
Yeah.
And I bought a whole bunch of it and kept what I wanted and got rid of the rest.
Okay. Very good.
Same with cases and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I've got road cases that I've picked up from lots of people I've worked with that decided, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to sell a few things. Well, I'll take a couple of those.
Yeah. Is there any particular case company you like? I mean, there's Anvil, there's Calzone, which is by Anvil now. But are there any case companies that you like in particular?
For quality, let's see. In Chicago, let me think for a second. It's on the tip of my tongue. They've been around forever. It used to be part of DB Sound. R&R cases.
Oh, okay. All right.
R&R in Chicago built some of the, best constructed and well built, long lasting cases, but they're also some of the more expensive ones. Sure. Out here on the West Coast, A&S has always built a really, really good quality case.
Okay.
They were taken over by Encore.
Okay.
And so forth, but they built some really nice stuff. In most cases, for case companies, where people would go wrong over time is people would want to get quarter-inch cases made because they were the cheapest.
Yeah.
But, you get a quarter-inch case, and I've seen a million of them over my years of touring. They last 2, 3, 4 years, and they're junk from being in and out of trucks and having several hundred pounds piled on them in trucks.
Yep.
They get all caved in and broke up and busted up, and after a while they're junk and have to be replaced.
Yep.
Well, I've always told people that it may cost you a little more today, but spend a nickel or two and buy the don't buy the 3/8, buy the half-inch cases, and you'll have a case. You buy a good quality case, and it'll last you your career.
Yeah.
You buy a cheap case, you're going to buy several of them in your career.
Yeah.
Or have gear damage because your case just, is too thin. The forklift goes right through it.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
and what do you do for fun, Peter, outside of Marshalls?
well, I when I can a little bit, I drag race.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, right on.
My father was a drag racer on the East Coast when I grew up and stuff like that. So, yeah, I once I moved to Northern California, I could feel comfortable about having a hot rod in the garage and not somebody trying to steal it while I was out on the road or something like that.
Yes.
So, I've started drag racing again. I haven't in a while now, but when I get a chance to, I'll get back to it again. It's one of those things that, much like after you've had a couple of Marshalls, you want more. Racing and speed are very addictive. There's something about the rush of adrenaline every time you line up and the tree comes down. It's game on. you win, you keep going. If you lose, you load it on the trailer and head for the house.
Yes.
Overs.
Do you ever race here at Sears Point?
I have raced at Sears Point before. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a hop and skip jump from where I am.
Sacramento out of business over here a year. So now Sears Point would be considered my local track over to Finian.
All right.
And it's 99 miles from my driveway to theirs.
Very good. And do you miss sleeping on a bus at all?
Yes.
Do you really?
Yes.
Oh wow.
There's just something that comes with touring for a long period of time that when you're not on the road, after a period of time passes, you kind of start getting a little itchy again. You start feeling like, oh man, it's time to get going, and man, you just can't wait to climb on the bus again.
Yeah.
When you're doing it for months on end, you can't wait to get home, and then you get away from it, and it's, man, I can't wait to go get on the bus again.
That's good to know. That's good to know. We should say I really enjoyed this time speaking with you. But the name of the book is Collecting Loud History, correct?
Collecting Loud History, correct.
And the website is collectingloudhistory.com.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
And you guys have T-shirts available. Apart from the book, you have T-shirts available.
That is correct. We came up, our web designer came up with a great little design for that based on a conversation she had with Peter. And it's kind of funny. I don't know if Peter told you that story or not.
Nope, he did not.
Okay. Well, we told the girl, he says, remember the Max L commercial or whatever, where the guy's sitting on the couch and his hair is being blown behind him like he's standing in front of a tornado?
Yep.
And she goes, and she's a younger gal in her late 20s, and she's going, no, what are you talking about? And it's like at that point you realize you're old. He looked it up while he was talking to her, and she goes, "Oh, I get it." And he goes, "Yeah, I want to have I have this vision of a guy standing in front of stacks of amplifiers, and his hair's being blown back toward you at the audience or whatever because of the air movement coming out of the stacks. He's being blown away." And, she's an illustrator, and she came up with a sketch, and that was her first crack at it.
Right on.
His picture came up with was her first crack at it. So Kaylee deserves all the credit on the design of the T-shirt, and she's also the one that came up with the idea of, well, we should make it in multiple Marshall colors.
Oh, right on.
So that the stacks are whatever your favorite color you want to be.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yep.
Including font?
So far, the purple one is the most popular.
Okay. and on the website, there's a small gallery, nothing like the book, but there's a small gallery of some of the heads.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of flipping you can do and see some of the stuff, and you can blow it up, read each amplifier has a story that goes with each amp cabinet or combo, has a little story that goes with it that kind of tells, how we, each one of us guys might have acquired the thing, what it is that may be special or different about that particular one, because you find, especially in the vintage amplifiers, that even within the same year, there can tend to be differences one amplifier to the next. You have English models or European models with a Bogan plug. You've got hardwired models that came to the U.S. And so forth. And here and there, there's just some different things or whatever that might be special about them. And if there is, we elaborate on that.
Yep.
And tell what it is that attracted us to it. And if it came from a famous celebrity, we tell about that. If it came from a particular music store, we acknowledge, where we got it and so forth. And just show a little appreciation where some of the stuff came from.
Yeah. No, it's great. I saw it at NAMM and when I was over there with you guys, and it's a fantastic book. It is overwhelming. We
are really, really looking forward to getting the printing process rolling and getting these things done. And we're hoping that we're going to have pallets full of them in May, and we're going to turn Peter's house into a shipping center.
Right on. Very good. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, Brian. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much, James. Absolutely a great time chatting with you.
Yeah.
Call anytime. If there's anything you need for Marshalls don't hesitate to give me a ring.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Brian.
All right, my friend.
Okay.
Take care.
Yeah, you take care as well. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Have Guitar Will Travel. You can catch up on all the things I'm doing at thedeadleys.com, and I'm on all the social media platforms as well. And please support Vintage Guitar and all the wonderful things they do, because they do many, many wonderful things for us guitar players. Thanks. Please subscribe. Please tell a friend, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys.